So continuing with this idea that Batman is one of the greatest fighters in the DCU, it's worth noting that that list is kind of an ever-moving target, but suffice it to say that Batman is consistently within sort of the top 5. Therefore, I think it should be frightening to see someone like this in action, and as much as it pains me to say this, I have to give props to BVS here again. This Batman's body is as adaptive as his mind. He's brutally efficient, while still showing a certain kind of elegance in his movements. I guess if I really had to sum up what I'm looking for here, it's that Batman is a problem solver, and a fistfight is just kind of another problem he has to solve. It should feel something like stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson in his prime. We should be worried about these people. So, comparison time, how did Nolan depict something like this that's so central to the character? Well, here we've got something that I think is a real weakness of Nolan's as a director. And this point may be somewhat tangential because it doesn't really have anything to do with the homophonous tone. It's really got everything to do with amateurishly conceptualized, filmed, and executed fight scenes. And I don't say that lightly. I'm a bit of a fight scene nerd, so granted I've got some pretty high standards, but there is some sort of general advice that I'd give to really any director. First, you have to let the audience actually see what your performers are doing. You have to kind of zoom out to give the audience a sense of the environment, where in the environment each of the actors are, and where they are in relation to each other. It also helps tremendously to find committed performers who really want to make these scenes look good, and that means really practicing the choreography over and over and over again so that they can do the entire thing from beginning to end. And lastly, preparing for and relying on the first 2 points makes the editing process that much easier later on. Here you can rely on the performance, the extended takes, instead of kind of splicing it all together in this messy, rapid succession. These tips kind of apply to action scenes in general. At its best, it should look like this. And at its worst, it looks like this. Anyway, it doesn't even really matter what kind of fight scene you're trying to have, whether it's kind of highly choreographed and super martial artsy, or very in-your-face, violent, gritty, and super realistic. All action scenes, I would argue anyway, can benefit from these points. And you've probably seen some other videos giving kind of similar tips to directors. My point here is really to relate it back to Nolan's trilogy. Another great example is this fight scene from Donnie Yen's movie Flashpoint. Let's pay attention for a second here to where the camera is. What does this let us see? It's not just the fight, but we can see the entire space around the fight. We know where our actors are in it, and we can see them moving through it in a way that makes logical sense, and makes it easy to tell where they are in relation to each other. We know what they're doing, where they're doing it, who's getting hit, where, and with what. It's all kind of this one fluid, smooth, and clean scene. It's not jarring at all. Also, I could watch this suplex all day. Now, let's compare that to the final climactic fight in Batman Begins.
You will never learn. Familiar, don't you have anything new? How about this?
I realize a lot of this is just my opinion, but I would argue that nothing about this is good. Genuinely, it's one of the worst fight scenes I've ever seen, and I can't stand it. In defense of this scene, I've heard people argue that this was done intentionally to make the fight feel cramped, claustrophobic, desperate, and more dangerous. To which I reply, well, here's a scene that achieved exactly that without committing any of these errors. It's cramped, tight quarters, fast, desperate, and yet still staged in a way that we can see everything. I'm now going to predict the complaint festering in the back of your mind. That's not a fair comparison, you'll say, because Donnie Yen, Jet Li, and their respective stunt teams are expertly trained martial artists. It takes serious skill to do this that well. Now, that's a moot point. For one thing, how does zooming in, jump cutting, and giving your audience a headache serve to improve upon lacking performances? Your actors could be more resourceful than just using flying kicks and crazy spins. Here's Sean Connery as James Bond kicking ass, for example. I don't think he's a kung fu master. For another thing, and this is the real nail in the coffin for that argument, both Liam Neeson and Christian Bale are perfectly competent action stars and have done great fight scenes in other movies. Equilibrium, for example, came out 3 years before Batman Begins, and Bale does a great job.
Clarence, what's happening? We heard gunshots. Go!
Here's the classic Rob Roy, and this is so much better. Look how fucking gritty this fight is. It's a thing of beauty. And it's not because of any of the actors' skill, but because of our investment into the characters, and, more to my point, because of the way it's shot. You might be thinking, but surely the fight scenes get better as the Dark Knight trilogy goes on, right? Nope. So, in my opinion, there's really no debate here. Christopher Nolan is not a good action director. And I don't mean to pour hate on the guy. I like his movies just fine for the most part. I really like Dunkirk, for example. I think it's probably the least Nolan-esque of his films, but really, I wish him all the best in improving on this in the future, and I'm sure he will. It's just that maybe now you can see where people are coming from when they criticize these movies.